Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Black STEM Futures speaker series. And this evening we are joined by Divya, who is a planetary geologist, writer and composer, who's going to be talking about her career and what she does in her science. It's the first sort of space-themed talk we've had in this series, so I'm really excited for this. In case you've not joined us on one of these before, my name's Em. I'm the Education and Learning Officer at the Wellcome Genome campus, and I'm here to help with any technical stuff that we might need help with this evening. All of our events are aimed at helping everyone explore STEM subjects, and so I'll be moderating the platform to make sure it's a safe and inclusive space for everybody this evening. If you want to get hold of us, you can't use your camera or your microphones this evening, but you can use the chat box or the Q&A to answer any questions that Divya might ask you, or to ask her anything about her work or the science that she shares with us this evening. This is the sort of last in this little batch of speaker series, but we will be doing some more in June. So if there's any STEM topics that you'd like to specifically hear about, you can let us know by emailing us, and we'll see if we can get speakers to talk about that area of STEM. But for now, I will hand over to Divya to talk about her awesome work in planetary geology.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for that introduction. So I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully you see that okay.
Yeah, that looks great.
Yeah, good. And just going to make sure I can see your comments. Great. Yeah, so hi, everyone. I am Divya. I am a PhD student at University College London, and I'm also a postdoc at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. If you're wondering how I'm doing that, it's chaos. I'm currently finishing my PhD while doing a new job, basically. And I'm going to talk to you about how my work, planetary geology, is a form of storytelling. And I'm going to do this by telling my story, but also the story of how we work and how we are trying to tell the story of the solar system. So here's just a little map of my life. I started out and am currently in my hometown here in New Jersey in the US. And these are just some of the places that I've worked. Of course, did my PhD in the UK. So I wasn't actually in London. I was in a laboratory out in Surrey. And then I was living in Durham last year. So why did I choose planetary geology? And I'm going back to the beginning. I really loved science as a kid, and I really liked collecting rocks. And I asked my mom how I could do that professionally. And she said, that's called being a geologist. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I borrowed loads of books from the library and just read about rocks. And I was also interested in writing and art, which I'll talk about a bit later. So this is a park that is maybe a mile away from where I am. And I grew up riding my bicycle in this park and taking walks here. And this was really influential. So if you see on the left, I was surrounded by rocks, basically, in the woods. And everywhere were these big, nice, round, beautiful rocks and sandbars and streams. And I was really interested in how those rocks got there and why they were shaped the way they were, and why these streams and sandbars would change with the weather after a big storm. And so that was kind of my first interest in rocks, was basically collecting a lot of these types of rocks that I still have, and trying to figure out where they came from. And then the second kind of thing that happened was when I was maybe 11, I saw these pictures on TV, and I had no idea what they were, basically. I just turned on the TV, I saw some special on a science channel, and these images are actually taken from not only a different planet, but a moon of another planet. It's not even our moon. So the image right here was taken on the surface of a moon called Titan. And Titan is a moon, it's the largest moon in the solar system, and it's a moon of Saturn. And normally we can't really see much on the surface of Titan because it has really, really thick clouds. So if you see up here, it's really, really thick sort of haze. And so for a very long time, we didn't know what was going on the surface until we flew this lander through the thick atmosphere. These are pictures it took as it landed. And then it saw these rounded rocks. And I thought, huh, that kind of looks familiar. And this picture was really, really important in planetary science because a lot of scientists saw this and said, hey, that looks familiar. And not only did they see that, but they saw a lot of processes happening on Titan that seemed very familiar. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think these rocks might tell you? So this might be from your geography course, or you can guess, or just sort of think about it. So very similar rocks between what I have in my town and the rocks on the surface of Titan. So if you want to pop that in the chat.
We have one idea that the rocks might show us that there was a lake or river where the rocks are.
Yeah, that's a good response. Anybody else? Okay, yeah. Basically water, right? So you get rocks that are very rounded if they've been eroded, which means sort of softened and worn down. And that usually happens when there's transportation. And on Earth, that happens through water. So you get rivers and lakes. And so the rocks over here were actually once in mountains. They were carried down by glaciers. So you get really big boulders, and then they've worn down by water. On Titan, there is no water. And so that was really exciting. They thought, what is going on Titan? And it turns out Titan does have rivers and lakes and rain, but they're actually frozen gases. So things like methane and ammonia that are acting like water on the surface of Titan. So I learned about that and I thought, okay, that's just completely mind-blowing, right? And I thought, okay, I want to study that. Not only do I want to study that, I want to be someone who works on missions to find out all of these cool things that are happening on other worlds. And another big influence for me was that I really loved Star Wars as a kid. I still really love Star Wars. And I really liked seeing different planets in Star Wars. I really liked seeing different ways the artists in Star Wars drew like mountains and rivers and lakes. And I always thought about how cool it was that there could be so many different types of worlds. And it turns out our solar system isn't really that different. It's not Star Wars, but it is so diverse and so fascinating. And so I'm going to talk a little about that. So first, I'm going to ask you what geology is. And I know a lot of you probably have learned about geology in school, but I just want to get your idea. When you think of geology, what do you think? Or yeah, the study of rocks. Yeah. Anybody else?
I've just noticed we've had a few people join in the last sort of few minutes. So if you've got an idea of the what is a geology question, there should be a button at the bottom for the chat box, and you can type an answer to us there if you've got any answers. The study of rocks is definitely what comes to mind for me when someone says geology.
Yes. Yeah, I'm always interested in what people, so I think we know that it's the study of rocks, but what is your sort of impression of what geology is? But I'll show you. So geology I'm going to talk today about is Earth's story. And so on the left shows the entire lifetime of the Earth so far. So this is the start of the Earth, and this is around where we are. This tiny little sliver is us. And the rest of it is geological time. So the Earth is very, very old. And this is a lot of time. So understanding all of this time is very, very difficult. And on the right is an illustration of this time into the different geological eras. Also showing that the further you go into the rock record, the deeper you go, the further back you're going. So I like to call it a sort of time machine or a time capsule where rocks, especially further down, can tell you so much. And it's all part of building up the story to understand where the Earth came from and how it's changed over time. So I think we're often, when we think of geology, we think of things like volcanoes, but it's also going down all the way to minerals and resources and searching for those resources, as well as the ways biology interacts with rocks. So things like corals are preserved in the rock record as fossils, but they also do a lot of chemical processing in the oceans that's really important. So I'm going to ask, so we have an idea of geology, but what are some ways that geologists do their work here on Earth? If you want to put that in the chat, please.
So if we think about geology and what we think maybe people who do geology on Earth, and any ideas you have for that, maybe where they might do it, what equipment they might use, who they might work with. We've got one that says uncovering fossils. I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So uncovering fossils is a great answer. So there are a lot of things. I actually didn't include fossils, so good thing you said it. I think geology and geologists do a lot of really amazing things, but they do it from even like the very smallest scale, studying crystals under the microscope, which is called mineralogy, all the way up to studying volcanoes, sampling lava, studying our oceans, studying glaciers, going out to these places. And I really want to emphasize a lot of geology is going to places and taking measurements and doing experiments and drawing. But then it's also a lot of lab work of doing experiments and looking at under microscopes and that kind of thing. And another thing, stratigraphy, which is a lot of drawing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, is really going into what the story is in the rock record. It's really going to places, touching them, looking at the color and the texture and all the ways the layers relate to each other. And that's really, really important for the bigger picture of the story of Earth. So some of my previous work was actually earth science. So I was more in the lab. I didn't go out into the field and touch rocks or anything, but I used instruments to measure how magnetic certain rocks were. And this was something that I did at university when I first started, when I majored in geology. It was really fun. It was exciting. It was something that sort of challenged my idea of what we do as geologists, because it's very much a different story than going out and looking at a cliff. You have to think about, okay, why is this rock magnetized, and how strong is that magnetic field, and why? And that's very much physics, right? And so magnetic fields can tell us a lot about, so I studied both meteorites and sort of material that came from big impacts on Earth. And that magnetization can tell us about the asteroids that meteorites came from, but also the impacts they have on Earth. So these were looking at not just little rocks like this, but actual just individual crystals that we would put into this big machine and measure these magnetic fields. So this was super physics-based and wasn't as about space. And I was really interested in going more into planetary geology. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. So planetary science is about the planets. So it's not just about Mars or the rocky planets, but it's about all of the planets. But I'm going to ignore the big gassy planets today because we can't do geology on them. We can't really access their surfaces, and they're so big that their surfaces are probably just very, very little bits of ice in the middle. So we're just going to focus on these guys, but we're also, as planetary geologists, really fascinated by the moons of the solar system. So I showed you that the image of the Star Wars worlds, and our solar system is kind of like that. We have so many cool worlds in our solar system. So these are just moons, and here's Earth's moon. So there are moons that are even bigger than Earth's moon, like Ganymede, which is a moon of Jupiter, and Titan, which I talked about. and all of these other little moons. And they have really weird, interesting geology. They have really big craters. They have these weird sort of ridges. They look like they've been stretched and sort of put back together and stretched again. And this one, Io, is covered in volcanoes. It's the most volcanically active moon or anything in the solar system. And so part of the story here for Earth is, why is Earth the way it is? And why are these worlds the way they are? None of them have water or clouds, except Titan has clouds and haze. So why is Titan like this, but then other little moons are just sort of dead and cold? So there's a bigger, more complex picture and story of what the solar system's history is. And so I showed you volcanoes and gold and corals earlier. And we have these big volcanoes on Venus, for example. We have mineral veins on Mars that are a lot like the minerals that we get in sort of, if you've ever been to like a sort of like Bath, for example, it's a sort of natural spring, and you get all of these minerals that come up, and you have the same thing on Mars. So these two things kind of tell you interesting things about the stories of these places. Now, we don't really have a story about life in the solar system because we haven't found it yet anywhere else except Earth. But there are a lot of places that we're looking. For example, here's a picture of Mars. This is a concept of what Mars may have looked like about 2 billion years ago, where it had probably a huge ocean and then all of these highlands and polar caps. And so this doesn't look too different from what Earth was, right? And then here are, I showed you a lot of these moons, and here are the interiors of these moons, just sort of drawings. And a lot of them have, it's kind of hard to see if you see sort of a blue strip in there. That's actually underneath a really icy surface. It's water ice and carbon dioxide. There are these global liquid oceans that are most likely water. So these are really, really alien, right? It's nothing like we've seen before. But maybe there could be life in there. And so here's an example of one moon of Saturn called Enceladus. And there was a mission, which I'll talk about, that actually observed it with these huge geysers. And it flew through these geysers, and it turned out it was liquid water. It was warm and it had salts in it. It looked a lot like our oceans. So it was really exciting. So I asked you how geologists do their work. How do you think planetary geologists do their work?
If anyone's got any ideas, pop them in the chat box. But seeing as the last one was uncovering fossils and we've not obviously found life in the rest of the solar system, be interested to see how we can study it if fossils aren't an option. Looks like we've stumped them a little bit, Divya. Do you want to?
Okay, yeah. So collecting samples from spacecraft. Yeah.
And rover samples.
Yeah. Oh, you're spoiling it. Okay, great. These are great answers. So these are a couple of pictures of planetary geologists on the moon. So the moon missions were kind of the first time that planetary geology really happened, because back in the 70s, we didn't really have cool space missions going to different planets. Well, we did, but not really looking at in detail on these surfaces. So when we landed people on the moon through the 70s and 80s, geologists actually got to pick up rocks on another world. But unfortunately, we haven't sent people back to the moon. And for example, the UK hasn't sent anyone to the moon. So this is kind of, we as geologists can't wait around for them to send us again. So someone mentioned rover samples, absolutely. So here are two rovers. Here's Curiosity rover, and here's Perseverance. These are basically little geologists. So Siri, you mentioned, could it be from rover samples? So they don't just sample, which is so important. They do all sorts of things that geologists do. They take samples, they crush them, they take pictures, they shoot lasers at rocks to see what they're made of. They measure things, and they basically do anything any geologist will want on the surface of Mars. So here's a little fun video of Perseverance landing that I'm guessing some people may have seen. Oops, sorry. There we go. So on the left is a picture of the rover being let down by this, which is called the sky crane. And this is the view the rover has of the ground. So if you look, there are all of these things on the rover, and those are all of the instruments. And so what a rover does after it lands is geologists and engineers plan out what's called a traverse, which is it's a little journey. So this is the traverse plan for Curiosity rover. And so you can see it in a white line. It's going up this big hill. And right about now, I would say it's probably around here. So it's getting towards where it wants to go. And I'll talk about that a bit later. So on its traverse, it takes all these images, it takes data. And so these are really recent images. These are from maybe a month ago of a really weird kind of what's called an outcrop. So I showed earlier geologists going outside and taking measurements of layers and drawing them. And so this was exciting for people who do that, where we're seeing all these layers. And so the further you go down, again, is going back into the story of Mars. And this height, for example, is about 7 meters. So it was really tall. So I said they take pictures, but they also do other things. And so this is Curiosity, which shoots lasers and also takes pictures at different wavelengths. And that can give you a sort of chemical composition of the rocks that you're looking at, which is really interesting. So Curiosity went to look for habitable environments. And what that means is, was Mars at some point welcome to life? Not that it was there, but could it have been warm and wet, and were the ingredients all there? And so that's where the chemical composition is really important. Perseverance is more looking at, was life here? So it's sort of following up the question of Curiosity. So I don't know if you've seen this. Perseverance also has a little helicopter called Ingenuity, and Ingenuity is sort of the next stage of doing planetary geology, of being able to not just be on your little traverse, but to get to look at other places. And then there are other places that we've landed in the solar system. There's Titan, as I mentioned, and you can get a lot of information from just this one picture. You can get sizes, and that can be studied by people who use models based on computer science. And then here is a landed picture on a comet by the European mission of Rosetta, which landed a little probe called Philae. And this was the first time we actually saw the surface of a comet. And there were all these boulders. There may actually even be some sort of like layering. So this was really, really interesting. So we're starting to get away from just Mars and getting to look at other cool places. But the problem is, it's not really happening that quickly. And on Mars, there have only been so many things. There have been a few rovers, and in the future, there'll be another rover from Europe. And then there's some other sort of landers, but they can't move. And that's just Mars. And in the rest of the solar system, I've shown you all the landers, basically. So for a planetary geologist, you kind of run out of what you're looking at. How are you supposed to really look at the story of these places when you can't really go to a lot of them with these rovers? And the reason we can't go is because they're really expensive, basically. So one answer is using satellites. So on Earth, if you use Google Maps or if you use a weather app, all of that data is coming from satellites that are orbiting the Earth and taking data constantly. And so this is really helpful when you want to get loads and loads of data about somewhere. And we do this plenty for Earth. So for example, this is an image from GOES. This is an animation of I think a typhoon off of the west coast of the US, so in the Pacific Ocean. But it's not just Earth, of course. There are Mars orbiters. So here's an animation a friend of mine made of. These are real images from an orbiter around Mars that have been stitched together into a movie. And so you can see how high up it is and the kind of view that it gets. And it's constantly going and it's constantly sending back these images. So we're actually getting a load of images of Mars. It's not just from the rovers. And this helps us to build Mars's story, not just from the really important science that rovers are doing as little geologists, but also giving us loads of data to look at the bigger picture around Mars. So it might not be as fine as little rocks, but we can look at, say, mountains, we can look at big ridges, and we can map out the geology here. So I talked about the Huygens probe. The Huygens probe was attached to a mission called Cassini. Cassini explored Saturn, which was almost like its own little solar system. So here are all the orbits that it did in, it's actually 2017. So in 13 years, it did so much. It was so cool. And here are all the instruments. So it's not like a rover. It doesn't have sort of the eyes and the chemical tests and stuff, but it has other things. It can look at the radar. It can study magnetic fields and gases, and it has cameras as well. So it's able to look deep into the clouds of Saturn, and this is from the very top of the poles. And this was something we've never seen before on any planet. It was able to look at Saturn's rings and moons as they moved, basically. And it was able to look at those plumes that I mentioned. So here's a picture of Titan, and here's looking underneath the clouds using radar and seeing weather on Titan. And so Cassini was really exciting. There's another mission called Messenger, which went to Mercury that I worked on at NASA. And this instrument is a bit different. It's actually a laser, and it mapped Mercury by shooting lasers really fast at the surface and then catching the signal back. And that actually told you the elevation of the surface. So the first sort of research I did in space science was this, seeing how we could use that laser data to actually look at the composition of the Mercury surface. And that was really, really exciting. And that really impacted me. I thought, okay, yes, absolutely. I want to work on space missions, and I want to use satellite data to understand planets. So from all these satellites and the rovers, we're starting to really understand the stories of other planets. So I showed you the time scale of the Earth. So here it is at the bottom. We're starting to build up these stories about other planets and moons. But it's not all easy. So when you have a satellite, and here's an image, it looks straight down at a planet. And it's great because it gets so much data, but the images it takes are just sort of like little maps. So if you look at Google Maps, it's not like, unless you're using sort of Street View, it doesn't look like you're standing in front of it and looking at it. And that's really important for geologists who are used to going out and touching things and measuring things and drawing them and right in front of them. And we as people on the Earth look out sort of to the horizon, right? We're looking out, we're not looking straight down. So that really changes how geologists understand what's going on. So here's some 2D images. This is Earth, and this is Mars, and this is moon of Jupiter. So yeah, geology is studied not just in up close and personal, but we get to walk around things, right? So if we were aliens, what would we think about Google Maps? So here's an image. So this is actually from Google Maps, and it's a place in London. And I've sort of messed around with it because planetary data isn't perfect. It's blurry. There might be data missing. It'll be funny colors. So I'm going to ask you, where do you think this is in London? So you're an alien, you're looking at Earth, and you have your little satellite, and your satellite takes this image of somewhere in London, and you have to figure out what's going on. So you might not know where it is, but if you know like what it is, if you know any features in this picture.
Yeah, this is definitely really hard. Someone's put by the River Thames, and I think that's as much
By
as
the
I
River
would
Thames.
be able to work out.
Yeah.
Some bridges.
Yeah,
and it's definitely quite built up, but other than that, it's very difficult to actually tell.
Yeah, so you can see the River Thames here, right? And you can see the bridges. So if a geologist was looking at this, they'd think, okay, there's water there. Well, what else could we really say? It's kind of hard to concentrate on. It doesn't look like anything you've seen just sort of going outside, right? So it's actually Waterloo Station. And even looking at it in the normal color, it kind of, if you didn't know what Waterloo Station is, or if you didn't know it had that like funny shape, I mean, I'm American, so I would see this and I wouldn't know what it was, but you still kind of, you wouldn't think this is a train station, right? You might see this and you might think, okay, that might be railway. But if you didn't know that there were railways on Earth, then you think, oh, I don't know, maybe this is water or something. Maybe all these blocks are from tectonic plates, or it's really, really hard to be a planetary geologist who's using pictures like this. And they're never this good. They're always like this. So how can we make maps better for geologists or easier to understand? And I'm going to ask you this because I kind of hinted at the answer earlier. And if you think about Google Maps and how you use it, just have a think and let me know.
Think maybe we stumped them again, but I'm guessing short of being able to make the images better. So someone's put take photos of smaller areas and build it up into to make a full map. So maybe, yeah, that'll hopefully, I guess, make the pictures clearer.
That's a great answer. So absolutely, if we take more images like this, for example, all over the area, then we'll get a better picture. And that is something that we do for satellites. But the problem is if you are studying somewhere that, and this is a very tiny feature, and only maybe 3 geologists are really interested in it, and everyone else isn't, the satellite probably isn't going to cover it that much more. So a lot of it is about money, it's about time, it's really about how hard it is to capture something. So on Mars, we have global images. On other places, we really don't. And a lot of that is, okay, we as geologists have to think, well, I'm really interested in this one thing, but this thing is really important to see. So unfortunately, we can't do that everywhere. So since I stumped you, one solution is 3D. And I'm going to explain to you how that works. This is a little image that I'm teasing, but I won't tell you how this is made. So I'm going to ask, how do humans sense in 3 dimensions?
Maybe another tricky question. I'll give a hint that I think about is when you look at something with one eye and then swap to the other eye. So maybe think about what that does for our brain. No, it looks like we've stumped everyone again.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so as Em hinted, our eyes sense in 3D. And the reason that they sense in 3D is because we have 2 of them. And not only do we have 2 of them, but they're not right on top of each other, they're separated, right? So if we're looking out at, say, a tree, each eye sees that tree at a slightly different angle. So if you sort of look at something where you're sitting and sort of flip between your eyes and stay perfectly still, that image kind of goes back and forth, right? So it's taking 2 pictures, and our brains are kind of understanding, okay, this is where the sun is, and I know I'm this far away from this thing, and so it gives us depth. So if you sort of walk around somewhere that you're not familiar with only one eye open, you might feel like really unbalanced. And it's not just our eyes, our ears do this. It's why we have 2 ears as well. And so this is a really important part of how we function. And as geologists going out, again, we understand in 3D, we walk around things, we understand the shapes and sizes of things. And that's really important to how we understand the rocks around us. So does anyone know how we might make 3D images? So if you've seen a 3D movie, how is that made?
Got to say, other than wearing the funny 2-colored glasses, I really don't know. So I'm really interested in what the answer for this is.
Yeah. Okay, so 3D images are made in the same exact way that humans see in 3D. You take two images covering the same thing at slightly different angles, and then the brain is a computer. So if you're looking at a 3D movie, say it's like Captain America and it's in 3D, I don't know if Captain America is in 3D, but they film the entire film with two cameras looking at the scene. And so when you put on your red-green glasses, the red side is covering one image, which is coded in red, and the green is covering the other image, which is coded in green, and they block each other out. So then your brain finishes that sort of 3D construction in your head and says, oh, this has shape and texture and is 3 dimensions. So for space, we can do the same thing. So these are two different pictures of a dried up river on Mars, and they're taken at slightly different angles. And so I can take these two images and feed them into a computer, and it can say, okay, here's the size and shape of things. So I'm going to show that in a minute. It's just pretty amazing. And one cool thing about this, and so this is the topic of my PhD, is you see all these layers, and that's really exciting for geologists because that's exactly what we see on Earth. And we think, okay, the further we go down, the further back in history we're going. So it'd be amazing to study this as if we were there and being able to touch it and measure it. And whether that tells us anything about, say, water on Mars. So satellite images in 3D kind of join up with rover images on Mars and feed into the story. And so this is a little animation of a lake in the area where Curiosity rover landed and how it dried up over time. And so if there was a Waterloo station on Mars, which would be hard to sort of figure out from just an image, if we got two images of it and looked at it in 3D, we might be able to figure out, okay, this is some sort of building. So I got into 3D images working at NASA and a place called the SETI Institute. And I used 3D models to study craters on the moons of Saturn. So you can see all of these cool craters. And they weren't really great looking, so I'm not going to show them to you. But they're really cool in way to look at how these moons changed over time. And I really wanted to continue to use 3D. So that fed into my PhD. So I came to UCL and I really wanted to study where Curiosity rover landed. And so this is my 3D data that I've made. And so here is the place that Curiosity landed. It's called Gale crater. It's a big crater, so there was a big impact. And then there were lakes and rivers. Here's a big river system that I just showed you. Here's the lake system that Curiosity has been exploring, and Curiosity is right about there. And then there's this big mountain, and it's going up this big mountain, and we don't know why it's here. We don't know if it was a volcano or if it was water moving all these rocks up there. It's kind of strange. And one way we can sort of understand how this formed is going back into the rock record. So I showed you that river channel, and that's somewhere where we can actually go back into the rock record. And so this is a 3D model that I visualized that I've been analyzing. It's really, really cool in 3D. So it's not just that 2D map and you don't really understand it. This starts to look like, okay, I'm in Google Maps, and I kind of see like the terrain, the shape of what's going on here. I see all these layers. And then you get street view, and it looks a lot like what I would see as a geologist going out. Now this is huge. This is about 3 miles across, but it's still closer to anything that we would get just from a map. And we can really get to measure the shapes of these layers and the relationships and understand what was happening here going into the past. So here's an example of how I do my analysis with this data set. It's really cool. It's like being there and taking measurements. It's also like if you've used like Adobe Illustrator or PowerPoint to draw lines and stuff, it's exactly like that, but you're drawing directly on the rocks. And you can take all sorts of measurements, basically anything that you'd like, and in different colors and stuff. It's really cool. And so that's fed into, I've been able to look back at the story here. And so I showed a sort of column earlier about what geologists do out in the field. And so this is going into the layers and the history at different points in this channel. So this is a really specific tiny piece of the story up here that is my PhD. But how can my work fit into the story of this bigger place? So here's just a little animation of how geologists have used all this data to come up with a story for Gale crater. So there's a big impact. There were all these fractures that probably filled with groundwater back when there was water on Mars. All this water sort of welled up and formed a nice little happy lake. And that lake rose and fell and formed these nice, beautiful layers. And this happened probably over the course of 2 or 3 billion years. So that's a really long time. Maybe bacteria formed, but we don't know. And then that water dried up and we had dunes. We had that big mountain sort of forming. We don't really know how. All the sediment started to build up and mostly by wind. And then over time, that wind sort of blew that sediment into nice smooth shapes and scoured it out. And then left this big mountain probably, and left all these nice layers exposed. And so this is the mountain that Curiosity is going up. And then there were all these fractures. There's maybe more groundwater coming up, all these sort of minerals forming. And then we landed a rover there. So that's across maybe 1 billion years. But that's the story of Gale crater. And that's how planetary geologists work. We use as much data as we can, all these little bits, to make a story. So coming up to the end, so my path seemed really clear. I wanted to be a geologist as a little kid, and I wanted to be a planetary scientist. So it looks like a simple story, but it wasn't. It took a lot, and I got ill at university. I took time away. I didn't know if I would be able to be a scientist because I always thought that geologists have to go outside and touch rocks and basically hike a lot and be in the sun a lot, and I couldn't do that. So that's why I was really interested in 3D and being able to do sort of this sort of work where you don't have to actually be there. And space also needs a lot more BIM and other representation, and that's something that you might not see yourself represented in the field, and that can really affect you. But having friends and encouraging mentors really helped me. Just making connections with people, asking people all the time, any questions that I had. A lot of the work that I did was just me emailing someone and saying, like, I'm really interested, can you talk to me about this? And they would invite me over, or they would send me a long email and say, look over here and do this and come work with me. And so it can be difficult, but it can be really, really rewarding, especially if you have the people around you who really care about you. So success for me isn't really about like achieving all of these things, especially because my body tells me to stop quite a lot. It's just about being happy and about making sure that I get to be curious. So make sure success is about you, and it's not about anyone else. Like, I know, pleasing your parents is important, but don't make it about, oh, so-and-so is achieving all these things, so I'm failing. And that's not the case. Your success really has to be about you. So even if you're not interested in space, but if you are, space careers aren't just about geology, and they aren't just about physics. I have friends who are artists in space and in space science, and they're really important because they give us a sort of visual idea of what these stories are. You have, of course, astronauts, but different astronauts are artists, they're doctors, they're geologists, they're pilots. You can go into technology or computer science, or you can be an engineer, or you can be a public speaker. You can do advocacy work. You can do science communication. So there are a lot of different paths. If you're interested in space, but you think, oh no, I'm not really good at maths, or physics sort of freaks me out, or I'm not really interested in chemistry. There's so many other ways to get into space or to be involved in space. So don't let those things scare you. And just make sure to follow something that you enjoy, because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not happy, then it's not worth it. And that's it for my story. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Divya. I learned so much about really cool space stuff there. So thanks so much for joining us. If anyone's got questions for Divya about any of the things she talked about or about her sort of career in general, pop them either in the Q&A or the chat box and we'll pick out some to ask. But I will start off while we let people have a chance to type. If anyone in our audience was really interested in space science and in planetary geology, what would you recommend maybe they read or watch, or any skills they might want to build up that might help them in the field if they wanted to get into it?
Yeah, a big thing for me was just reading as much as I could. So honestly, I read a lot of Wikipedia pages because I think space science is kind of that thing where it's not quite geology or geography, and it's not quite physics, or it's not quite astronomy. So if you're really interested in planets in the solar system and space exploration, I would say just read web pages, go to the European Space Agency website and just read about their work, read about their missions. So there's a lot of really good resources. They really try in space exploration, they try to make things so that people can self-teach and learn about all of this. So go to the NASA homepage and like click random links and read Wikipedia. And it sounds silly, but it's a really great way to actually learn about all these things. And yeah, so I would recommend that. And yeah, that's the European Space Agency link in the chat. And again, I wouldn't necessarily say like if you don't like maths, like, and you think you have to do it for space. I mean, yes, we use a lot of math, but you don't necessarily have to. So I would emphasize like, yeah, physical sciences, natural sciences are important, but like make sure you are not stressing yourself so much that you are unhappy. So so yeah, I would say that. And also like if you are interested in just seeing a lab for a day or doing a work experience, look up universities' astronomy departments or geology departments and find someone who's doing something cool and just email them. Or, you know, write them an email with your parents and just say, I'm really interested in what you do. Can you talk to me? They might call you, they might FaceTime you, they might bring you out for a day, they might give you some sort of work experience. It's a really great thing. And I think so many space people are really interested in helping people out and telling them what they do. So I would absolutely recommend that. That's something that I did. Just contact people and say, I'm interested and can you talk to me about this? I don't really know about it. No one's going to be annoyed, I promise.
Awesome. Again, we'll give, I know we're coming up to 5, so we'll give it a few minutes in case anyone's got any other questions. But another one that I like to ask speakers is, if you could discover or do anything in your field of science, no funding issues, no access issues, what would you pick to discover or do?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, there's so many cool places. I feel like getting people on Venus would be pretty cool. Venus is really, really hot and has sulfuric acid rain. And so you can't even get a rover there. So it'd be really cool to not only get a rover there, but like get people there to see it, because it's sort of our sister world and we don't know why it's so different from ours. So that'd be really, really cool. It might be terrifying.
Someone's asked whether you've worked on moons such as Europa and Ganymede.
Yeah, so I didn't talk about it because I've just started, but my postdoc is with Europa. I'm working on 2 missions to explore Europa. So one is launching in 2024 and that'll just orbit Europa. But it's definitely trying to look for, to see if the ocean is habitable. And the other mission is concept that we have in proposal called Europa Lander, which would land on Europa and stay there, I think, for about 3 months. And do some drilling and do some sampling and all the cool stuff that rovers do kind of from one spot. So hopefully we'll get funded.
Awesome. I'll give it another couple minutes if anyone's got any last questions. But so you're obviously about to start your postdoc. What sort of career options, sort of broadly looking sort of forward, might you look into? So if we've got students that are looking at doing sort of planetary geology, what might be options sort of later down the line?
Yeah, so there are a lot of options. I would say So my path was very much like going through the PhD and everything. So scientists tend to do their PhD. I'd say engineers don't, but going beyond the PhD, so you can work, especially in like UK and Europe, you can work with the UK Space Agency or the European Space Agency and work sort of on missions and science, or you can become an academic. So most of the space field in the UK are academics. So these are people like professors or researchers at universities who also, again, work on missions and do their own science and also do some teaching. So there are a few different options. And I think there are a few companies where you can get involved, like Airbus does a lot of engineering of spacecraft. So companies like that, or Astroscale, or I'm blanking on companies in the UK. So yeah, there are a lot of, you can go into industry, and that tends to be more engineering and some science. And then there's academia, which comes with like the teaching, but also getting to explore your own research, and then working for a space agency, which tends to be sort of this high-paced, fast-paced thing where you work on missions, but you also may be a little less research focused because it's working on spacecraft. So there are a few different options there. And then also like space science communication is really important. So all these places tend to hire people like writers and journalists and artists to do work. So there are a lot of different options, and museums as well. So the Natural History Museum also does a lot of space science.
Awesome. I think we've probably got time for this last question that I think is a really, really interesting one. So Daniel's asked, could colonizing Mars potentially destroy some of the evidence of life?
That's a fantastic question. Yes, it depends. It depends on a lot. It depends on what the life is like, and it depends on what we do. And we don't know what the life is like, and we don't know quite what we would do. So it's a legal problem as well, because if a company goes versus say NASA or ESA, a company might not follow the same sort of rules. So it's a big conversation happening where people who study biology and space, astrobiologists, do a lot of work saying, okay, well, these sort of activities could impact bacteria if they're there, or and people who work on the ethics of space ethicists who work on basically how can we morally do these things, also look into, okay, well, what kind of activities should we be carrying out? And then there are people in space law who say, well, actually, this is what's legal and what isn't. So currently, there's international space law that says we can't disrupt the environment of a planet, but that's open to interpretation legally. So it's yes, I would personally say yes, but we also don't know, and it also really matters what decision we end up making, because that's coming soon. I think even just landing astronauts there could really disrupt something, or it could do absolutely nothing. We don't know. So yeah, look out for that, and it's really important, and we need to keep asking things like that, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of that is very much like, just because we can do something, and especially in sort of space science, like just because you can land something here or go somewhere, should we and how should we be mitigating for things that we might cause problems along the way? Because I know with satellites, there's a huge issue of the amount of space junk, I think it's called, that we have in our atmosphere. So we need to think about what happens after we do something just as much as we think about how we do it in the first place.
Yeah. So there's one problem with the Europa Lander is we think, well, if, for example, Europa Lander happens to take some Earth bacteria that could be harmful to local life on Europa, if there is life, or it could destroy evidence of life. They've made a whole system, and there's a whole team working on this called Planetary Protection. And essentially there's a little sort of very, very tiny explosive on the inside of the lander that would go off in that case and just sanitize everything, basically. So yeah, very, very small. It wouldn't like explode, but it would just be a bit of heat to kill any bacteria that's there. So they take it really, really, really seriously. And we do have to go through so many like clean tests for Mars rovers to make sure we're not taking any sort of Earth bacteria there, because even that could maybe potentially kill life on Mars if there is any. So yeah, but people actually do that work, which is really cool.
Awesome. Looks like that was all the questions that we had. So thank you so much, Divya, for joining us this evening. And thank you
You're
to
so
everyone
welcome.
for coming along as well. As I said, this is the last in this batch of speaker series. We'll be doing more in June. So if anyone's got any particular topics in STEM that we haven't covered or that they're really interested in and would like us to find a speaker for, I'm going to pop our email address, well, I'm at least trying to put our email address in the chat box, so you can email us and let us know what topics in science, anything that you can think of that you'd like to hear about, and we'll try and find a speaker for that. I think most of you are here from our Black STEM Futures project, so make sure you log these hours on your ePortfolio, either under developing your skills and knowledge or shaping the future. You can't put it in both, but you can pick which one you'd rather put it under. And yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one.